Empirical questions are questions that must be asked if we are truly interested in the well-being of others. Perhaps the most important distinction is between what sounds good and what works. On the one hand, what sounds good, on the other, what works. Why is that distinction so important?
I guess it was because rhetoric and visions play such a large part in higher education that the question of whether some vision is correct, what they believe is correct. I saw recently a replay of something by AOC, the Congresswoman from New York. And as I listened to her, I just was amazed that there seemed to be no factual issue as far as she's concerned. She just pronounces things to be so, and that's the end of it. And unfortunately, I think too many certainly, college students and students in high school for that matter, are introduced to a certain vision of the world where, for example, the capitalists are exploiting the workers and so on. And they just memorize that, and they talk about it as if it's a known fact. And there's no developing in those students the ability to look at two different views and try to figure out which of them is correct. To me, back when I was teaching, if I taught a course that had a lot of controversial stuff in it, I would spend a great deal of time putting together a reading list where I would find the strongest argument on one side of a particular argument, and then the opposing view, the best example I could find of that, and I would then present that to the students. And when I tested them, I didn't test them on which side you believed. I tested them on whether they understood the arguments on both sides. I suspect from what I see and hear that that is something that's rarely done today in education at the college or high school level.
I see. So the old-fashioned principle of teaching, which is that before you make up your mind where you stand, you make sure you understand where the other person stands first.
Yes.
All right. Tom, again on your website, factsagainstrhetoric.org, you provide a reading list, but you also provide links to a number of videos and podcasts. Here's one. This is a link to your old professor at the University of Chicago, and then for many years your colleague here at the Hoover Institution, Milton Friedman. In this video, to which you link on your website, Milton is addressing the question, is capitalism humane? Take a look at this, if you would, with me, Tom.
It's true that if you had a concentrated power in the hands of an angel, he might be able to do a lot of good, as he viewed it. But one man's good is another man's bad. And the great virtue of a market capitalist society is that by preventing a concentration of power, it prevents people from doing the kind of harm which really concentrated power can do. So that I conclude that capitalism per se is not humane or inhumane. Socialism per se is not humane or inhumane. But capitalism tends to give free rein, much freer rein, to the more humane values of human beings. It tends to develop a climate which is more favorable to the development, on the one hand, of a higher moral atmosphere of responsibility, and on the other, to greater achievements in every realm of human understanding. Thank you.
All right. That's Milton. Now, it's one matter to argue that capitalism represents the least bad system, but it's another to argue, as Milton did just then, that capitalism produces, quote, I'm quoting Milton in that clip, a higher moral atmosphere, close quote, and again, quote, greater achievements in every realm, close quote. Tom, wasn't your old professor and your Hoover colleague Milton Friedman getting a little carried away there?
I don't think so. But if he was, it was the way to answer would be to put forth opposite evidence to what he's saying, and that's what doesn't happen. That is, a lot of what is called education is really indoctrination. And so it's not a question of whether I happen to agree with Milton Friedman or anyone else who's watching. It's a question of do the people who would disagree with him have any facts, any reasoning, any logic that would be relevant to what he's saying? And all too often, it's not true. They don't.
Could I ask you? The website again is factsagainstrhetoric.org, and you've already told us that the reason you pulled that together was to produce evidence, to be empirical, to teach students to be empirical, to look at the facts. On the other hand, from this passage I just quoted, from Basic Economics, your book, empirical questions are the questions that must be asked if we are truly interested in the well-being of others. And then Milton just said in that clip that capitalism produces a higher moral atmosphere. I just want to tease this out, that as best I can tell, your insistence on empiricism, on looking at the facts, is because you have a sort of moral groundwork on which you insist. There's a pre-existing sense of morality, of right and wrong, and of our duties to each other. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
All right.
Without that, civilization would just not be possible. I mean, every one of us is vulnerable to all sorts of things. If we couldn't rely on someone, take it from birth. I mean, we come into the world knowing nothing. We don't even know that we need food, much less how to get any. And so you must have a structure out there. It's also true that even as we move toward adulthood and into adulthood and old age, there are times when other people, and lots of them, are essential to our own well-being. I think of all this talk about equality. In a sense, equality is enormously important, and in another sense, it's enormously irrelevant. It's important that we have equality before the law. It's important that we regard each other with a certain kind of equality. But to talk in terms of equality of capabilities is madness. I mean, if you're the world's leading authority on some particular subject, that doesn't mean that you have even minimal competence in 100 other things. And it's one of the most dangerous things in the academic world and among intellectuals in general is they often seem to assume that they know better than other people about all sorts of things, including things that these other people know from their own personal experience. And that's what makes intellectuals so dangerous.
All right. Back to your website, Tom. Under the heading Biographies, you provide a link to A Personal Odyssey, which is your own autobiography or memoir. Here you are in A Personal Odyssey describing your response to the civil rights movement of the 1960s. I'm quoting you. The idea seemed to be that white people's sins were all that stood between us and economic and social parity through American society. The enormous amount of internal change needed within the black community in education, skills, and attitudes seemed wholly unnoticed. Civil rights were important in and of themselves as a matter of justice. But to expect civil rights to solve our economic and social problems was barking up the wrong tree, close quote. Tom, this notion that civil rights, as important as they are in and of themselves as a matter of justice, but that the black community needed, and I'm quoting you again, internal change. Could you explain that?
Well, in one sense, that's well. First of all, I would repeat that now. That all groups have their own cultures. and in many groups, including blacks, there are internal differences in cultures within the same race or ethnicity. And so one of the great handicaps historically that the black community has had is that during the era of slavery, blacks were concentrated 90% or more in the South. And the South, in turn, had its own culture, which was different from people who came from other parts of Britain. And I've gone into this at length in a book called Black Rednecks and White Liberals. And the people who came from the South, they had this culture when they were back in Britain, where they were called crackers and rednecks and things like that. And it's easy to understand if you understand the history of their life in Britain. But once they transferred to the United States, that same culture was a huge handicap. And that's the culture that blacks grew up in. And so, and again, with blacks as with the whites, more and more generations of blacks began to put aside that culture to operate in ways that would be more productive for them in the new society. And now this counterproductive culture persists in many low-income ghettos. And unfortunately, there are intellectuals and others who celebrate this culture and try to keep it going, when in fact it's a great handicap.